Sune. In Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment. Through the practice of generosity and the other perfections, may I reach the state of Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Good morning. I'm particularly pleased to be able to start this period, at least until the end of the year, to be able to share with you one of the parts for me which is most important for me, which has touched me more than any of the other teachers which I have received within this lineage of Buddhism. This gives me particular joy, above all because I've seen the life of all of us. What happens very often is that we're overcome in our daily life by survival. We're taken up with daily necessities. We're taken up with problems that arise and problems that we look for, pleasures that we experience from personal questions, problems of family, couples, work, society, country, the world, etc. And what happens is that life goes by. Life simply goes by. Once I was in a congress organized by Lama Ganshan, which he organized for many, many years in Madrid. He did it for about 25 years. Once there was a doctor who spoke and said, we can change ourselves. We can transform ourselves. He was talking about epigenetica from the point of view of the genetic point of view, according to our choices, lifestyle. We can transform ourselves genetically. He was talking about the plasticity of the mind, of the brain, the fact that our brain, according to our way of thinking and the way we live, the brain transforms. For example, there are various studies which shows the difference between the brain of a person before and after learning an instrument, a musical instrument. There are physical changes in the brain, and spoke about microbiome, which are these infinite number of beings within us, who, at the same time, according to our choices and the places we go to and style of vita, we transform. The microbiome is change, which has enormous influence on ourselves. It was a really interesting talk. It was a very interesting speech, but he But he said something that I wasn't in agreement with. He said, we can change, transform ourselves. And I went to I went to him and said, well, I'm not in agreement with you. Oh, sorry, he said, we cannot change ourselves. He said, I said, I'm not in agreement with that. It's something, it's not a possibility. Actually, it's inevitable. We are constantly changing. Therefore, it's not true that we cannot change. We're constantly changing. And we have no choice in the matter. We don't have the choice to say, I want to stay the way I am. Maybe I'll change something. That possibility doesn't exist. We don't have the possibility to transform ourselves in one way or another. We're constantly in transformation. What I want to say is that every word we say, every place we go to, every choice we make, every meeting we have, every action, every thought, every sensation, emotions that we have, transform us. Today, we're the result of all the interactions that have taken place in our past until today. And with this, first of all, it's important to see and to understand. It's important to understand this, because this brings us to a question. I want to transform myself in an aware or unaware way. What do I choose? Because I have no choice. I want to transform myself, becoming the result of the world that surrounds me and things that happen around me, like a leaf blowing in the wind, or a boat without steering? Or do I want to transform myself in taking in hand the rudder of the boat, giving a direction, choosing the direction in which I want to go, in which I want to transform myself? Because fortunately that possibility does exist. It's not a question which we can find an answer. Very simplistic. It's not easy to give a simplistic answer, because we shouldn't find an answer from a conceptual point of view. It's easy to be conceptual. Yes, I want to transform myself in the direction that I choose. But the question is this a priority or not? Is it a choice, a deep choice, that to change my lifestyle, which requires the awareness of the importance of every moment of my life? Do I want it or not? To be able to arrive to this answer, because everything which happens within the so-called mind trailing in Tibetan called Lojong starts from this premise: I want to change myself in a direction that I choose, and therefore I recognize the power that every moment of my life has. I want to be responsible for my life, or do I want to live like a victim as a consequence of what happens around me? Therefore, in order to be able to arrive at this answer, we start with, which is what's called the base, the path and the result. In Tibetan, she, base, Lama, path, dribble, result. The base refers to the present moment, refers to the resources which we have in this moment. We practice base, path, and result. Because first we must understand where I am, who I am, what are the resources I have. Once I'm aware of that, at this point, the successive path is to understand the result with what I have, with the resources that I have now. Where can I go? Who can I be? What can I do? And once that I have clarity on this, on what I can do, then I have an objective in front of me, a clear objective. Who I want to be, what I want to do, what I want to be, what I want to reach, and which way I want to transform the resources that I have at the moment. And then we apply, well, the action to take, the path. Somebody said to me once, there's 1% of inspiration and 99% of sweat. Once you've decided where you want to go, the inspiration, then you have to actually start walking. You can't say, okay, I want to arrive there. One day I'll open my eyes and I'll be there. So then we have the path, the so-called path. The path cannot exist if there's not an objective. The objective cannot be desired if there's not awareness of the resources that we have in the present moment. We have to start, whatever objective we have to start with what we have at the present. Therefore, let's give a bit of space to reflect on the base. Where are we? Who are we? I think that's clear now. Now, first of all, on the base, we're sentient beings. What does that mean? That we're alive, therefore we have an interaction with the world that surrounds us. We live within a cyclic reality where we birth, growth, sickness and death, rebirth, and so on. We live within that cycle. Within the life, within life itself, there's a cyclic existence. That applies to sentient and non-sentient beings. A plant has a cyclical life. There's always the relationship between summer, autumn, winter, spring, etc. There's the cycle of the night and day and the lunar month. If we take a path, does it have a cyclical nature, a cyclical life? Yes, certainly. And the same for all living beings. And well, first of all, we need to recognize that we're living beings and we don't exist in an independent, removed way from everything. We are part of nature. Deep down, we're animals. There, we're part of nature. We have our cycles. We are influenced by the environment that resounds us, etc., etc. That's an important point of departure. But above this, we're also sentient beings. A sentient being means that we have a sort of consciousness. We have not only a part which is physical, biological, of interaction and reaction with that which surrounds us. But we have this, but also we have a part which with certain autonomy to judge, choose, and direct ourselves. This is a very important aspect of our existence. We're sentient beings. Means that we have this capacity to choose. Furthermore, we're human beings. What does that mean, that we're human beings? It doesn't mean that we're superior to others. If we take the Buddhist teachings, in many texts that says that an animal can develop bodhichitta. It's not true. When Buddha Shakyamuni spoke of 500 lives as a human being, as a bodhisattva, and 500 as an animal, 500 as a body. Human being and 500 as an animal. So it doesn't mean, just because we're human beings doesn't mean we're superior to animals, but what happens is that human beings have a characteristic which is quite particular, which is important to understand. We have instincts, natural instincts. Some forms of life have stronger instincts and some less. And we have a part which is very strong, which regards our own perception, our individual perception, beyond just instinct. And the main difference between us, between human beings and other animal forms of life, that is we have this strong capacity to review and relive the past and to project ourselves in the future. We have this capacity to imagine. And it's a wonderful capacity if we look at the things that human beings have managed to create and do. Where do they start with? From our capacity to imagine. Therefore, to go beyond the reaction, mere reaction at the present moment. We have this capacity, which is marvelous, incredible capacity to project ourselves in the future, imagining things, and with this direction, give ourselves direction to do something. Like an artist, before he does a painting, he has to imagine it. Before you make a sculpture, whatever that we create, first of all, we have to imagine it. That's a very special capacity. And if we were to ask ourselves this capacity that we have to imagine in the future, past, and also the present, how much does the present imagine? How much do we imagine the present every now and again? How often do we react and follow our senses directly? And how often do we elaborate, review, and project, in other words? If we were to make a percentage, how many of our mental states are experiences of our direct experiences of our mental states, and how many are the result of our mind? What do you think? What wins? The five senses or the mind? I think the mind. That's what I think. Therefore, we have a capacity which is very strong, and we use it very often. But, as many things in life, our capacity is not, it's not bad or good. Depends how it's used. And at the base of our being exists this strong desire to be happy and not to survive, and to not to suffer, which is the same for all sentient beings. All sentient beings have in common this strong drive, this craving to be happy and not to survive. The difference is that the more we work on the basis of our instincts, the more we look for happiness and avoid suffering in the present, and we react to what happens, the more we have a conceptual reality, the more we project our happiness in our mind. So we might look at the past, the future. And from this we get to two very important points. One is that, as we've already said many times, that suffering, what do we have more, physical or mental suffering? Mental, right? Mainly in this part of the world, where physical suffering, if you're not sick in a very serious way, the physical suffering, what do we have? A bit of a headache now and then, now and again, a bit hungry, feeling a bit cold, a bit too hot, but very little. Is that right? Because if it's cold, hot, air conditioning. If it's cold, heating. If we're hungry, we immediately eat something, etc., etc. If we have a pain, we take some pill to take away the pain. Effectively, physical suffering, we have little. But that doesn't mean we live in a state of peace, well-being, and contentment. Because there is also a state, a generalized state of dissatisfaction. You just have to look the comments that we make, the things that are said. If we were to take our judgment and perception of the world and of ourselves, and the comment that we make, most of them are or rejoicing, thanks, or is it criticism? Unfortunately, the most of our comments are complaints and criticism, and we make a habit of this, and we're in this habit, whether we like it or not. Therefore, the point of departure is our suffering is prevalently in our mind. And if we were to be a little more, let's say, it's not the right word, but let's say extreme, even where there is a lot of physical suffering and extreme situations, the mental state is the most important factor. Because I've known people who found themselves in situations, extreme situations, physically, in society, and for their internal quality of satisfaction and peace, they managed to leave this situation, and in some cases even well. Therefore, we have many characteristics in our life which compose our being, which determine our state now, our current state. And I could list 5 of them, principally. There are 5 characteristics which form our being, through which we experience the world and perceive reality. Because the other important point is that every moment, everything that we live in, every moment of our life is lived and perceived through our perception. While I see you and you see me, we believe that we see each other. But if I were to analyze this, I'm not seeing you. I don't see you. What I see is my version of you, which is different from your version of you. And that's the same for everything. Therefore, let's just analyze this quickly. There are 5 characteristics which mold our being and that determine our way of living and of experiencing everything that surrounds us. Let's remember, the reality around us exists. External reality does exist, but not independently from the reality, the internal reality of each one of us. Nobody, absolutely nobody, is capable to perceive anything independently from themselves. And we have so many filters. Let's see these 5 factors. The first one is, there are 4 called in Tibetan with the specific names, and the 5th one, I won't say I did myself, but let's say. The first is Rikyukyente. There are characteristics of our being, physical and mental and emotional, that depend on our genetic makeup. Rikyo means family, lineage, family. Yente means characteristic, quality. There are the characteristics which we have today, which are the result of what our family, our parents and grandparents did. We have so much influence from this, which is transmitted from the experiences, past experiences from members of our family, much more than we realize. There are some studies, I read a couple of them, and where they show that studies with animals, that certain types of trauma are transmitted from one generation to another without even speaking about it. I reflected on this when I took my dog. She had 2 months, but had an amazing instinctive capacity to react in certain situations without being taught. I knew instinctively what to do, and this is called ancestral memory. The question came to me: I'm an animal too, or not? Or is it only dogs that have this ancestral memory? Or do we have it too? We have it too, without any shadow of doubt. And there are so many characteristics in our being which are transmitted from generation to generation. Physical aspects, but also mental. That's the first characteristic. Well, somebody might say, can we do anything about this? There's a word in Italian which I like very much, which is ni, which is yes or no together. Si e no. Ni. Yes and no. We can't do anything in the sense that we can't go back and change what happened in the past. To go back to my great father, don't do this, no. We can't do that and change the behavior of... But look, I'm suffering the trauma which you're creating. Stop doing this. There are psychological techniques which try and do this, to go back and change things. You can't go and say, but we can't really change the past. Yes, we can, as we mentioned before, and also from the scientific point of view, according to the way which we live the present and our capacity to change our conditionings and habits, we are influencing future generations, and yet we can change. But the fact is that we have this strong baggage, this heavy baggage from the past, which is considered, which we take it into, which must be taken into consideration. We should not be indifferent to the choices which were taken by our parents, the grandparents, and the social context. So there's a very strong genetic component which is transmitted. The second characteristic is called Kyepten. Means the characteristics which come from the power of birth, spontaneous characteristics at birth, refer to principally to the aspects of our being which take us from life to life, which, for example, we have characteristics, our own characteristics, habits, which are called predispositions, which we take from life to life. It's said that a person who has the habit to lie continually is reborn with the predisposition to lie. Somebody who kills a lot during his life is reborn with a propensity to kill. So somebody who meditates a lot is born with a predisposition for meditation. Once Lama Ganchen went to his master, Geshe Rinpoche, in the mid-60s. He had just arrived in India, and he was in a very difficult situation. Lama Ganchen in that period was, I won't say lost, but he really wasn't in an easy situation. They put him, they made him teach in Sanskrit in Varanasi, but he had no idea really why he was there. He didn't have a good prospect on what would happen. All his points of reference, the most important ones of his past life, were all lost. He didn't have the money to eat, even. He got a small amount of money, a very small monthly amount, with which was enough to eat once a day only. And the other half, which was enough for sort of half a meal, but he used that for public transport to visit his master. Once he went to Trishan Rinpoche, which didn't happen very often. It was a very difficult position. He said to his master, I think there's been a terrible mistake. I don't think I'm really the reincarnation of my Kachin Sampala, who was so evolved spiritually. But if I were him, I wouldn't find myself in such a terrible situation. There's so many people are better off than me. If I'm such an evolved being, I would be wouldn't be in such a terrible position. And Trijang Rinpoche replied to him, first of all, I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that you are the reincarnation of Kanchen Sapela. What happens is that when we die, our own characteristics and qualities remain in the mental continuum as imprints, as predispositions. That when one is reborn, some of them, of these predispositions are accessed and others not. And he said, a realized being, it's used un tulku, until their qualities are accessed, until these qualities are not accessed, reawakened, they appear as an ordinary being. And he said to Lama Gangchen, don't worry, your qualities you have, and you'll see, and there'll be a time when they will manifest, and for our good fortune that actually did happen. This is just to give you an example of when we die, our characteristics, our deepest beings, our strongest habits, of whatever type, remain as imprints. And according to the experiences that we have in the following life, we can access one or another. There are people, for example, who pass long periods of life without accessing certain qualities, but at a certain point they come into contact with a certain personal situation, poof, they suddenly arise and they're able to do things that they never thought they could, good and bad. Therefore, these characteristics, these imprints, are called spontaneous characteristics, which we have from birth. And we all have them in one way or another. The third characteristics which we have is, which determines our being, are Nomtok Gyenten. Top means to obtain, Nyon to experience, and these are the characteristics obtained through experience. The characteristics of our being, both physical, emotional and mental, which are the result of the experiences lived. Maybe let's say I live in a fearful situation and I develop fear. There are innumerable experiences from birth. We have from when we are able to perceive the world, actually, even before our birth, the period of gestation, in which these experiences mold our paradigm and our vision of the world. Our vision of the world is, a big part is determined by the experiences lived. Can we change this aspect of ourselves? No. Every new experience molds our being. It's obvious that the more experiences I have of a certain type, my vision of the world will be, that vision of the world generated becomes more solid. Then we have a fourth characteristic, which is called Gyenten. Top means power, Chan, to learn. Therefore, the characteristics, so these characteristics learned through study, not necessarily at school, but it means that the vision of the world developed through the information received, maybe social context that we live in, information my parents give me, everything I read and listen to every day, everything information I receive or have received forms an important part of my beings, and has a big role in determining my vision of the world. So a part is genetic, is the characteristics created in other lives. Without past lives, we can just say, we can even talk about imprints made in this life. We have a part, the experiences which we've experienced now, which model our paradigm, our vision of the world. And the fourth, the information that we receive to this date, which also molds our vision of the world. The fifth characteristic is our body, our real body, our senses. For example, when we see a color, what color do I have? What color am I wearing? Red and yellow. Do we all agree? If we were to ask us, this color, why is it red? The answer is, why? It's because it's red. There's nothing to philosophize and elaborate on this. It's red. If we were to analyze that which we perceive, we see the color red as red because we have visual power in our eyes, which a certain frequency of light arrives to us in a certain way. All sentient beings see colors in the same way. Well, let's even say, do all human beings see colors in the same way? No. I have a friend who created horrible graphic things, and then I realized he was colorblind. And I said, well, how the hell did he make something so awful? Because he had this characteristic of being colorblind. It was his perception. Somebody, if I go towards a mountain and I look at the mountain with snow, what color is in there? Snow. White, right? But if I have a strong hepatitis, what color is the snow to me? Yellow. If somebody caresses us, strokes us very gently, let's say a sweet touch, at the beginning it's pleasant, but what happens if I have a fever or hypersensibility? It's happened to me with when I've had a fever, when somebody strokes you, it's like a tiny cut, as if there were tiny cuts on the skin, and when somebody touches you, it's really unpleasant. What I want to say is that we don't see the world. We see that which our senses see. We perceive the reality through our senses. But that reality which we see through our senses, but we think that it is the reality. And if I see the mountain and it's white to me and you see it yellow, there's something not right, you're wrong. What color is the mountain? Ah, like the hat of Lama Michel Rinpoche. Oh, come on. There's something not right here. Oh, because I have my senses and I see differently. Somebody explained the color. When a dog sees a color, to a dog, red and green are nearly the same color. And if we were able to speak to the dog, if I was to put myself next to a tree, a green tree, and ask the dog what difference is there, the dog would say, well, no, the same really. And what I want to show in this is that we're strongly influenced by our senses. But this helps us to understand the reality which we perceive doesn't exist independently from our own senses, independently from the values that we attribute, which are formed from by our experiences and experience received, and the imprints and our DNA by those four things. Therefore, our experience of life is determined by many, many things, and never by one simple factor. Is that clear? If we live an experience in peace or with suffering, and even what we experience is determined by all these characteristics. There's no experience which is lived in the same way by everybody. It's not possible. Every situation, everything that we experience it through these filters. Genetic, imprints from other lives, and this life of the past, the filter of our experiences lived, and the information that we receive, and the filter of our senses and our body. All you have to do is to think, are we influenced by hormones or not? According to how does change in hormones affect the way we see the world? Yes. And not only for women, by the way, also for men. I'm convinced that men have a hormone cycle, but it's not so evident as it is with women. But certainly, men are strongly influenced by their hormones, by their own internal cycles. Therefore, it's important to start from this point. Whatever experience we live, there's not one exists as us being a victim of the world. Because what we call reality doesn't exist independently from all these characteristics. And we are not able to live anything at all independently from all these characteristics. And if one of these characteristics were different, our perception and experience of reality would be different. Are we all here? And that brings us to a very important point. But at the same time, it brings us into a very counter-intuitive direction, against the flow, against the trend. What is the message that we are continually bombarded with? That if we want to be in a certain way, we must create certain conditions. That our happens and suffering depend on our physical, material, social condition, etc. Is that so? Is this what we're sold or not? This is the direction that our society finds itself. Therefore, it's not something for today, these days. A few days ago I was reading the writings of Seneca, and there was a point in which he said there are many similarities with Buddhist philosophy and also Lojong, and there's a point in which he said to his disciple in a letter, and anyway, don't talk about these things, don't talk about this with people because they won't understand. This is for few people. And most people in society, unfortunately, and we're also part of this, part of the population, are taken up by looking up, to try to try and control our external world in order to be in peace and to live well. The tendency is to change circumstances, to change behavior of other people, to change situations, external situations, economic situation, house, health, the world that surrounds us. Why? To experience an inner feeling of well-being, peace and harmony, and to avoid suffering. This is the direction in which most of our life, and this is the direction that most people in all cultures that I've known until now, it's not different in Tibet. What we spontaneously do as human beings is to try to create conditions, external conditions, which help us to be well. Because one of the fundamental aspects of our being is that even if we cannot experience anything independently from our own experience, our own characteristics, our own being, and all our characteristics, we're not aware of this. And the folly, to say, is that even we conceptually know that reality around us doesn't exist as it appears, independently from us, we continue to see it. We continue to see it as being real. The example that's given in old times, Nagarjuna, by Nagarjuna, is the reflection of the face in the mirror. When we look in the mirror, we open our eyes, look in the mirror. Spontaneously, what do we see without philosophizing? We see our face, is that right? But if we analyze this, well, actually what I'm seeing, is it my face or is it the reflection of my face in the mirror? Who says that's my face? Nobody. You don't need a degree in philosophy to understand that which is in the mirror is not our face, but rather a reflection of our image in the mirror, right? But even when we have this clarity, that what I see is a reflection of my image, and let me just remind you that nobody has ever seen their own face. And when I understood this, it was a bit of a shock. Just think for a minute on the fact that none of us has ever seen their own face. There are a few reflections I can make on this, but we won't do it now. Even if we know this, when we look in the mirror, the image that we see, does it appear to us as a reflection of our face or as being our face? Without philosophizing, I know it's a reflection, but when I look in the mirror, what is it? I see my face. Similarly, when I know consciously that I can't experience anything absolutely independently from my own being and all its characteristics, when I find myself in front of a situation, how does that situation appear? Being the result of all my filters and my old being and my characteristics, or the situation? How does it appear? The situation. This is one of our deepest forms of ignorance. And what happens as a consequence of this form of ignorance is that which I perceive is the situation. I want to change the situation. If we make a connection between what we feel and and the world around us. The tendency, natural tendency that we have because of this ignorance is to project our happiness and suffering on our external world and to try to continually create situations which make us feel good and to avoid those which make us feel bad. Is that clear? And that's what we do normally. I started today by saying I'm happy to start this teaching because we're used to being, because most of our life is taken up with survival, and most of our life is overwhelmed by wanting to avoid situations which create sufferings and to create situations which make us feel good. But reality, what is it? What's our effective experience? Is it possible to reach this state of peace, balance, in a sustainable way, which is a very fashionable word now? Can we have a sustainable state of satisfaction and peace through changing external circumstances or not? I've known many people had all the external conditions to be well, but lived with so much suffering. Actually, most of them, to say the truth. Because most of us, for most of us, our external situation is optimum. But somebody will say, well, that's not true. You don't know me. Do you know what happened in my life? External circumstances in which we live, for most of us, are absolutely marvelous, but it's not enough. Most of the conflicts we have and difficulties that we have are not caused by an external objective way, but are caused by the interaction between people, by jealousy, fear, anxiety, arrogance, and so on. What happens is that our experience of reality that surrounds us is determined by our individual reality. And we've said this again and again. But what happens is, given that our external world appears to us as it exists independently from us, when we have an inner sensation, what happens, we try to find a correspondence outside in the external world. When we feel pleasure, what do? We enjoy it and thank the causes and conditions so complex that we don't have the awareness to understand why we find ourselves in this pleasurable situation. We enjoy and enough, or do we say, why do I feel this pleasure? We develop attachment towards that which we perceive as having created a pleasure. When we don't feel well inside, what do? We look to try to understand the inner dynamics which cause us to feel this way, or do we try to point the finger outside and find the culprit? Most times, when we don't feel well, we project inside or outside. Prevalently, outside. There's a term in psychology which I can't remember. I think I maybe even understood. It's something selective. I can't remember the term. Anyway, which refers to the fact that we have a selective way of perceiving our external world to create consistency with our internal experiences. I don't see that which is, I see that which I am able, that which I want in inverted commas, what I want to see in inverted commas, because we're not conscious of that. Once somebody spoke of this, made the example of various conspiracy theories. And there's an example which was so absurd, which said that this philosopher was saying, you think there's a current conspiracy theory, this is a few months ago, which said that the President of the United States, Biden, is the same, is exactly the same person as Trump, but who has the capacity to change his appearance. It's the same, exactly the same person, simply. But like in films, you know, people who can change their face. He changed his face, but actually Biden is Trump. Very, really, human imagination has no limits. We can create whatever. And this person said, this is an example where a person has an internal experience. I don't trust politics. One is the same as the other. And this sensation of not trusting is justified by an external narration in which I say it's the same person. Exactly the same person. And so that's why I don't see the difference. We create incredible external narratives, consistent or not. This is an extreme example. But there are so many narratives that are nothing more than justifications of how we feel internally. Therefore, what happens is we try to create external situations which justify our inner sentiments. Now, even if we don't live in this way, it's possible, with a bit of effort, with dedication, to go against the current, against the trend. The direction that our societies, it's not because it's Western modern society, but from centuries, millennium, society has gone in a certain way. The most common vision is that what we live is the result of external conditions. We need to exchange circumstances so that we can be well. And we curate certain objectives in life, in which happiness depends on having a nice house, happy family, stable job, and so on. Or am I wrong? Is that right? That's what's transmitted to us. Have we ever believed in this dream or not? Has anybody managed to realize this dream? Once, there was a boy in my class in the monastery where the Tibetans in exile had the dream, at least then, I hope not now, the dream was to go to America. And there was a very clever student in philosophy, really good in studies. He managed to get a visa to go to America. And then he arrived. In most cases, when they arrive in America, they don't find work. They have a very level job illegally, clandestinely. I said, be careful, because you want to go to paradise. And you'll get there and you'll say, how did I get here? I took the wrong road. How many of us have believed in the dream that's been sold to us? How many have managed to get this dream? Oh. Then we make excuses. We say, because, for example, we say, well, didn't work out because this is not the right person. It's not my knight in shining armor or my princess. I married the wrong person. It shouldn't be this one. If I'd married the right person, I would be happy. It's not the... I've got money, but it's not the right job. And it's not for this, that, and the other. The more we have, the more we're missing, lacking in lives. It reminds me of a friend in Nepal, Sunil. And he, a little shop in Kathmandu, sells fabric. And many, many years ago, I was just a small boy. Many times I went to Kathmandu. He did things for the center, made things for the center. I sat with him while he was working. We were chatting. He'd never studied, but he speaks 7 languages. A fantastic person. Oh, I had a good relationship with him. Last year, he cried like a baby. And he, talking to me, he said, I managed to get things which I never imagined I would have materially since we've known each other. Materially, my life has improved in a way that I never imagined. I've been able to do and obtain things which I never imagined. But however, the gaps, the holes in my life, and then he gave and then he decided to close the shop and dedicated himself to spiritual life. In other words, to look for a solution in the other direction. This dream, this objective to achieve happiness through external factors that's the mainstream idea. That's the current of the society in which we live. And if we look inside us, do we follow that direction or not? If we look at our lifestyle. Yes, absolutely yes. And not only us in the West. Go to a monastery in Tibet, you'll see exactly the same thing. One of the great challenges is to walk against the current. To walk against the current, I must understand that deep down my happiness depends on me, on how I find myself, how I am with myself, how I experience reality. And then to transform my own reality, and then reality, external reality, because external reality depends on each individual. There's a saying in Tibetan, Jikten means world, universe. It can be read as solar system, but also the world, the little reality in which, external reality, which each of us one lives in. Svakta means varied. Therefore, the varied worlds are born, leleke, are born from karma. What creates every situation is karma. One of the great problems in the Western world, when we follow Buddhist teachings, inevitably we hear the teachings of Buddhism through our own perceptions and our vision of the world. Who created? Okay. So who created reality in Buddhism, karma. But have you ever met karma? Do you know who he is? Do you believe in karma? As if karma were an entity, a person, to which we could say, thanks to karma, it's going well, thanks to karma, it's going badly. So this is influenced by our Western view. What happens is that the world in which we live is the result of the actions and the choices and the thoughts and the characteristics of each being that composes that world, and the interaction between each of them. That's what creates the world. Society in which we live in is a result of the interaction of all the beings that compose that society. The planet in which we live is a result of the interaction of all the beings that live in this planet. Therefore, when we change our being, we change our way of interacting with the world. Inevitably, we change the world itself. Therefore, at the base of all this, there are two characteristics which are very important. Let's just make a summary of what we've said. We have a characteristic which Buddha said, I'm my own protector, I'm my own enemy. That what I experience, I live as a result of my own filter. My experience of life is a result of my own action, of my choices. I am responsible for what I experience. And let's just remind ourselves again, there's nothing, absolutely nothing, that we perceive or experience which is independent from ourselves. Is that clear? This is a very important point of departure. Another point of departure which is really important. We've seen 5 characteristics: genetic, previous lives, the past, conditions, imprints, experience lived, information received, body and senses. All these 5 characteristics which form our being are continually in transformation. And everything changes precisely because it interacts. In every moment of life, with every experience that we have, every meeting that we have, we are changing our genetics, our imprints, we are transforming experiences, our vision of the world, the basis of our knowledge. And the world itself is also changing. Is that clear? Therefore, the first point is we perceive reality through ourselves. Second point, we ourselves are continually in transformation. Third point, we live life as if all this weren't true. We live life as if things don't change. We live life as if we're the victim of external factors, as if reality around us existed independently from ourselves, and we're just victims. What I see is what is, and it's not what I perceive. And this creates, as a consequence, we put our energy into creating conditions, external conditions, to obtain a pleasant inner experience. Is that clear? Now, can somebody put the clock in front of me? Otherwise we'll be here until this evening. We have these 3 points at the point of departure. These 3 points, all 3 of them are important, but the most important one absolutely is the fact that every moment we ourselves are in transformation, which is said we are interdependent. I don't know if you've ever heard this, the term, we have Buddha, we have Buddha nature. What is this thing, Buddha nature? What does that mean? What the hell does we have Buddha nature? What does that mean? A term in English, I don't know even if it exists. We have the nature of Buddha. What is a Buddha? It means that we have a pure nature. Well, what does that mean? Sometimes I hear people say that we're Buddhas, but we don't realize it. Well, what ignorant Buddhas we are, if that's the case. If we're Buddhas and we don't know it. If I'm a Buddha and I don't even know that I am a Buddha, well, let alone those who really know everything. I don't even know who I am. He who doesn't know himself can certainly not know the rest. Let's try analyze, going back to the root of the words. Our nature is pure. All phenomena are pure in nature, and so am I. The word pure refers to clean. If this water, is it clean or not? Pure or not? What are we asking? When we ask this question, what does that actually mean? What determines if that water is clean or not? First of all, what I mean by dirty. I have to know what I mean by dirty, because the concept of pure is something which is free from pollution, from dirt. It's interesting because if I were to see if the water is pure, I don't look for the characteristics of the water. There are characteristics which it doesn't have as being pure. In the water there are no dirty objects, there's no bad smell, and that makes it pure. When we talk about something which is pure, it's because it's free from dirt. If something is pure, it's because it's free from a kind of a pollution. When we talk about something is pure, it means that it's missing something else, is lacking something else. Is that clear? When we say our nature is pure, it doesn't mean that we don't have ignorance. It doesn't mean that there's no suffering. Because somebody will say, I've heard somebody say, Lama, if my nature is pure, why am I suffering? Whose fault is that? If a pure nature means to be a perfect being, well, why am I suffering? Because you have the pure nature, but you got dirty. But if my nature is pure, why did I allow myself to dirty myself? Because if my nature is pure, understood as a perfect being, in which point did I fall and get dirty? And if I fell, is it my fault or somebody else's fault? Because if it's somebody else's fault, I'm totally screwed. Because it means that to come back to being pure depends on somebody else. But if it's something that depends on me, it means that it's not totally pure. Why? Because it was totally pure. I wouldn't allow it to get dirty. The concept here is totally another thing. When we talk about our nature is pure, we have the same that same nature as all the Buddhas. So nature means a characteristic, a deep characteristic, intrinsic almost. And our pure nature is that we are free from what? From an objective existence, autonomous, independent as we are. Are we ignorant, arrogant, full of attachments, desires, envy, jealousy, and also nice things as well? But all these things, yes. But we are all these things, but in an interdependent way, in an ignorant interdependent way. In other words, what it means we are in this way through a very complex process of causes and conditions which bring us to this state. Our nature is pure because if we were to interact in a different way, gradually, we would transform. Our ignorance is not something which is autonomous and static and objective. Our ignorance is the result of a certain type of interdependence. If we were to generate a different kind of interdependence, in other words, if we to interact in a different way, we would change our perception of the world. We would change our whole being. In more complicated terms, our pure nature is the lack of intrinsic existence of our own being. In other words, our pure nature is the fact that we are interdependent, the fact that we are continually in interaction, and according to the interaction, we change accordingly. A Buddha is interdependent, and so am I, so we both have that interdependent nature. Therefore, the question that comes to mind when we look at all this is it possible or not possible to live in a state of peace, balance, well-being, to joy, independently of the conditions that surround us? Effectively, is it possible or not? We can even make the question simpler. Is it possible or not to... Is it possible to live in a sustainably balanced and harmonious and peaceful way? I don't know. I had quite a long period of my life when I thought it wasn't possible. I had a long period, at least 2 years, of crisis. My crisis was, I'm here studying Buddhism and dedicating my life to Buddhism, but I don't believe in the objective. Yes, in the past there have been great masters, they've achieved great states of illumination. I believe in this. But can I do it? Well, not at all. How can I do that? When I see the first steps are so difficult, how can I imagine being enlightened? At the beginning, at a certain point, I started to study more deeply. When I find myself in front of renunciation, the first step, following the verse of Lama Michel Rinpoche, having meditated in this way, with the law of karma and the suffering created by samsara, impermanence, etc., etc. When you don't have attraction for 1 second towards mundane pleasures, and from day and night there's desire to free yourself from the cycle of samsara. When this happens, at this point, somebody has realized the certainty of emergence, so-called renunciation. Let's start from the first point. when you don't project your happiness on mundane pleasure, well, hey, let's give up, let's go home. This is impossible. And it's not as if I were in who knows where. Remember, I was in a monastery. I looked around. I looked for an example of somebody who'd managed this, just one. I couldn't find even one. I looked at myself. How am I going to do this? My personal fortune is that I'm not a reactive person. Before I take a position, I reflect again and again. I'm very slow in reacting. And I had 2 years. In this process, I had the opportunity to talk to various people, masters, who helped me a lot. There were 3 meetings, which principally they gave me a meeting, and I'm going to share with you, because maybe it'll help you too. I had one with the Dalai Lama, His Sanctity, Holiness the Dalai Lama. I was in Tibet in Israel, most unusual place. I'd seen the Dalai Lama in India many times, but the only place I could have the opportunity to sit with him quietly was in Israel. And I asked him, I said, it's said that from the texts and what's taught, that if someone doesn't have an enunciation, this profound desire to get out of samsara, all the other actions taken are nothing more than a reinforcement of samsara itself. If that's it, I'm really, screwed. What can I do on a practical level to get out of this? He said, there were a few. He was in silence for a few minutes. He recited some verses in a very soft voice, and he said, you're right. Except for one exception. There's something called, which is the virtuous actions that, through the power of the object, there's certain cases, for example, your own guru, the Sangha and Dharma, certain things, certain actions, which, even when they're done without renunciation, however, become a cause for liberation from samsara. But afterwards he said the most important thing is that, remember that, to want to get away out of samsara, so-called renunciations. I say so-called because in Tibetan it's very clear, but the translation is not really good at all. The best translation would be definitive emergence, but it doesn't mean like an alarm. It means actually the certainty of being able to emerge, not emergency. It's not an alarm. This is an inner state of being able to emerge, to get out of suffering. And His Sanctity, His Holiness said, but to develop this, it's not, you get this not by observing suffering, by desiring by focusing on liberation. This opened my mind completely. To understand the direction that we have to take is not that which isn't right. We direct ourselves towards that which is positive. And then I had another encounter with Lama Michel Rinpoche in Nepal, which, very simple words, which was so important to me. He said, you have renunciation, but renunciation is not developed from one day to the other. But it's made up of very small renunciation. And remember that renunciation is wrong. It's not a question of avoiding bad things, but graduating, recognizing little things in samsara, create a kind of aversion to samsara and to desire to reach this so-called nirvana, state of peace. And it made me understand that it's a gradual process. Every step we take in the path is gradual. Every step is gradual. Gradual means it's not from 0 to 100 immediately. To get from 0 to 100, I have to go through 1, 2, 3, 4, until you get to 100. And to get to and to get to 0 to 1, you have to go to 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, etc., etc. It's a gradual process where every experience brings us towards in the right direction. The third meeting that helped me to close the circle was with my main Geshe Rinpoche, who's my main master of philosophy. He said, "Is it possible to decrease anger?" I said, "Yeah, I think so. I've seen it myself. I've seen it in other people. You need constant effort. It's not immediate, yes, but it's possible. Is it possible to love somebody more? In the real sense of the word, maitri, to desire the happiness of the other." I said, yes. Is it possible to gradually to be more generous, to develop generosity, humility, or to diminish envy and jealousy? I said, yes. And then he asked, what is the limit? What is the limit of diminishing anger? And the answer is, until it doesn't exist anymore. What is the limit of developing love? And that is when you reach unconditional love, and therefore it's possible to reach enlightenment. For me, what was clear in that moment is that we live reality, our own filters, but these filters that we have are interdependent, continually in transformation. And if we create the correct interaction, we can transform them much more quickly than we imagine. And for this, yes, it is possible to become a Buddha. It doesn't mean that we're going to have a face like Buddha and a funny hairstyle. And I never understood the hair of Buddha. I never understood why Buddha has this hair, this top knot that he has, which is described as a symbol of great merits. I never really understood this. But beyond these details, to become Buddha doesn't mean to say you have this top knot, even of the descriptions of all the minor major signs of a Buddha, etc. It's an interior state, an inner state. And the question that we ask ourselves is it possible? Even probably not now, immediately, if I put myself in the right direction. Is it possible to develop an inner state of satisfaction, peace, of balance, to overcome my anger, my envy, and to live in a state of harmony? It is possible, or is it? Is it possible to gradually develop my qualities and therefore diminish my defilements? So the point is not to diminish our defilements, to increase our qualities, but rather to increase our qualities, to diminish our defilements, to bring light to the situation, develop love, patience, awareness, that which automatically diminish anger. So we don't diminish anger to develop love. Is it possible to increase these qualities or not? Yes, it is. Therefore, from a basis in which the reality which I live happens through my own filters. I'm an interdependent being. I'm continually in transformation, and the way in which I transform is the result of these interactions. I live in a way which is not... No, I'm unaware of this normally, but if I lived in with awareness of this, and if I were that I could, through my interaction, can I, through changing my interaction, create more harmony and more satisfaction? I believe we can. This is called the result. What do we really want? Two things. The first thing from which we should direct, the first thing that directs us, what do I want? What do I want for me? What's my objective? With total sincerity, honesty. The only way to really be, the only real way to be ready to practice lodging. But don't worry, we're not going to give an exam on who's ready and who isn't. But the base, and this base, and this was the basis that they chose people who were entitled to study Lojong. It's really if I'm in love or not with enlightenment, if getting out of samsara is a priority, absolutely a priority for me or not. If I really believe to be my own protector, my own enemy, if I really believe in my own pure nature, in that it's interdependent, if I really want to get out of the cycle of mental defiance, actions and results, if I really want to reach this state, and if I really believe I can do it. This is a fundamental point. Once that we direct ourselves in this, the successive stages become almost naturally, spontaneously. Well, rather a consequence of this is that in which we see the others around us, and it's not enough. It's not enough that we get out of suffering, but we need to help those around us. And when we allow ourselves to actually see the other, we notice that really the well-being of others is just as important to us as our own well-being, and that the suffering of others is just as important as my own. It's not a state in which we forget our own needs. It doesn't mean we only see others and forget our own needs. Go beyond selfishness does not mean abandoning yourself. Going beyond selfishness, it means expanding selfishness. Altruism is nothing more than the expansion of selfishness. I don't know if that's clear. We have the tendency to think the altruism means that we have to eliminate selfishness to become altruistic. If this is the case, we'll never achieve this. Because how can I eliminate selfishness to develop... how can I achieve altruism being selfish? But rather, altruism is an expansion, it's the best version of selfishness. But selfishness is... Altruism is a state of this craving that we spoke about at the beginning, in which we desire to be happy and not to suffer. This strong craving is extended towards others. I want to be happy, yes. I don't want to suffer, no, I don't want to suffer. But your suffering is just as important to me as my own. Your happiness is just as important to me as my own. Therefore, altruism is an expansion of selfishness. Therefore, the main objective in Lojong is to, yes, I want to achieve a state of balance and peace because that's the only way I can help other people. Because when I see the suffering of others, there's quite a lot of it. Let's think of the current moment in which we live in as a society. Most of the suffering, without taking anything away, with all respect to the suffering, physical suffering of those who are sick, and also the effort of those who care for sick people, but taking the whole situation, this mental suffering, psychological suffering that exists in these days of anxiety, fear, aversion, etc., together is much stronger than the physical suffering of people in this precise moment. In many ways. And what generates so much suffering? Selfishness, aversion, ignorance. Therefore, how can I help others to be in a state of peace and satisfaction and balance and love if I'm not in that state? To help somebody, it's not like teaching mathematics when you want to help people to live in a state of peace. It's not enough to understand. The only instrument that we have, a real instrument of transmission to guide others, is the individual realization, is not the comprehension. I don't know if that's clear. I can help you to understand conceptually certain things, but I can never help you to realize if I have not realized this myself. And what this world really needs now is to be realized. Really need what the world needs now is more people who live in a state of peace, love, wisdom, balance. The objective principally is, can I reach the state of a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings? In other words, can I develop my qualities like wisdom, awareness, inner stability, peace, respect, gratitude, compassion, generosity, humility, and so that I can help every being reach the same state. That's the objective. When we manage to see this objective, at this point we go back to the present state. Now what do I do? Well, I'll give you something to do. And that's when we start getting into the teachings of Lojong and the process of learning. Okay. Sorry. One of the fundamental points for all of us is our capacity, effectively, what happens is that the basis of this exists our capacity to transform our own mind. Before we go into the verses, we need to see that Lojong is not a text, but it's a life choice. And the name of this training, mind training, which any training, how does it occur? Every now and again or with repetition? With repetition. If somebody wants to learn how to dance the samba, is it enough to see somebody dance the samba just once? Even if you go in the middle of the carnival in Brazil and you see everybody's dancing samba all around you, is that enough to learn how to dance it? Is it enough to try once? If I want to learn how to play the violin, is it enough to learn the theory? No. What's the real training of learning to play the violin? Is playing. And how many hours do I have to play? I don't even know how many hours you have to play the violin in order to learn how to play it. A training means repetition. Lojong. Training, mental training. Lo means mind. John means train. It means that what we want to train is the mind. There is something in our mind that we must repeat. They're in inner states which we must generate, which don't come spontaneously. Because one of the things of training is that we have to do things which don't come to us spontaneously. Otherwise it's not training. Training implies practicing things that don't come spontaneous, which we hope will become spontaneous. For example, military training. To learn how to play a musical instrument, or to learn a language, or learn to drive, whatever it is. As Shantideva said, in his guide to the life of a bodhisattva, there's nothing which is not easy once that we become used to it. Therefore, through the repetition, what happens, that which is difficult becomes easy. And there's certain attitude states which are not spontaneous, but if we have the capacity to induce ourselves into these states using instruments which are given to us, gradually these inner states become natural and spontaneous. Once, Geshe Chekawa, a master in the past, who wrote the 7 points of mind training, or one of the most famous texts, he lived a long way from Lhasa, I believe in the region of Kham. One day he found himself with a text in his hands, which he found a text called the 8 Points of Mental Training. When he read this, he was very struck by this. Remember that Geshe Chekawa was a Jap practitioner. Geshe, he was a very qualified person with disciples. He wasn't somebody who just woke up, found this text. He was qualified. He was a high practitioner. And then he read this, the 8 points of mental training. Can I always be? Can I view others? Can I view others as a wish-fulfilling stone in order to realize my own objectives. He read this text and he was very struck by this. I want to go and find the master who wrote this because I want to receive this. And this is a very important point because it's given, because in Buddhism there's a great deal of importance given to direct transmission. We must receive these texts through a long lineage of people who've actually had the realizations. And this is not just oral transmission, it's also a transmission of realizations and practical experiences. Recently I read 2 texts, Western texts, absolutely wonderful. The Manual of and the Letters of Seneca. So many things in the Letters of Seneca. You know, I think God, he copied me or I copied him, one or the other. There were phrases that were actually exactly the same. And what I realized was that the Western world doesn't have its own its own spiritual wisdom, but we have lost the lineage. That's the difference. I Stoici. Tell me where the Stoici are. Oh, the Stoics. You tell me, where are the Stoics now? I didn't even know they existed before I read about them, this vision of the world. But where are the Stoics now? What happens now is that but we have lost the uninterrupted lineage. We can get the texts of Seneca. You studied at university in philosophy, I imagine, but when we studied Seneca or whomever, or Plato at university, somebody transmits this to us, having received this transmission right down to from Seneca. I don't think it happens that way. We've lost the lineage. When we learn the lineage, it loses its power of transformation. Because this lineage is very important. Geshe Chekawa, when he read this text, in this text there was everything. But I have to go and see the master who transmitted this, to receive this. And he went towards Lhasa, walking for 3 months more or less. And when he was about to arrive in Lhasa, he met somebody who was leaving Lhasa and asked if Geshe Rinpoche was there at Lhasa. And the person said, he's just died. So he made a prayer. He prayed to be able to find these texts. So he goes towards Lhasa, and there are 2 principal disciples. Among these was a disciple not only of this Geshe, was also his Meister. He went to Sharawa Yontendrak and asked if he could become his disciple. And he went to every single teaching of his for 2 years. All the teachings, he was there. He didn't say, I'm a master. He humbly followed the teachings of Sharawa. And after 2 years, one day, he went to see the master, Geshe Chekawa. He was going around the stupa. He takes his cloak and puts it on the ground. Master, can I ask you a question? He said, yes. And he sits on his Geshe Chekawa that makes 3 prostrations, and he did 3. He went around the stupa 3 times as an additional way of respect, and he said, I came here to receive the teachings. But in 2 years I'm here, I haven't heard one word, a word about the 8 verses of mind training. Why? Is it because these teachings don't really exist, because their teachings are not valid? Why? And Geshe Chekawa said, he put his hands together in respect, said, not only do they exist, but they're extremely valid. The reason for which you haven't heard of them, is because those, amongst those who come to me to receive the teachings, they're too infantile to receive the teachings. They're not ready yet to receive these teachings. And he said, I want to follow these teachings. What do I have to do to be able to receive these teachings? And he said, the only condition necessary to be able to receive these teachings is the total determination with total priority to put in practice that which is learnt. They're not teachings that serve to be a kind of mental or psychological game or academic game. It's not there to debate, to study, and to think. No, it refers to the determination to train one's own physical behavior, verbal and mental behavior, without any excuse whatsoever. And he said, if you're ready to put into practice that which as the priority of your life, if that's the case, I can give you the teachings. And he takes that commitment, and he spends the next 20 years with the master to receive these teachings. After 22 years with this master, he writes the 7 points of mind training. Teachings which for centuries remained secret. Not secret in that there's something that you can't talk about. I've seen in the West, we have a concept that a secret is something that is something bad, therefore we can't tell the secret. But really, it's the opposite. A secret is something which must be protected. And it's said, and he who is not ready to understand correctly, it's lost. The teaching itself is lost. The teaching of Lojong, this mind training, this style of life is something very simple. There are no complications, conceptual concepts which are difficult to understand. There's one maybe very slightly more difficult thing, but generally it's really not difficult to understand. But it becomes very powerful if it's implemented, but if it's studied. But if it's studied and not implemented, it becomes weaker. And the first text we have, the Garland, the joy of bodhisattva. At the end of this, Atisha says, don't talk about this. Don't talk about this. Two literal translation. Don't talk about this to people who are not. Me means people. Mine means that are not. There are 2 ways to translate this. Either the non-humans, and for many times I received the teachings from various masters. The first time master said, this verse, first time the master said, I don't understand this verse, let's just skip it. And then others say it refers to spirits who who no one. But then I found a text in the transcription of Atisha Drondompa, and in this transcription of the conversation between them, there are the conclusions of each conversation. So I went to read this conclusive verse of the conversation in which Atisha says, the teachings on the mental training, don't explain them to those who are not ready to put them into practice. Don't explain them to those who are not ready to walk against the current, the tide. Why? The only ones who are the only people who are able to destroy a lineage is by those who have learned it but do not put it into practice. A lineage is destroyed the moment in which those who are supposed to represent the teachings behave in a different way. They say one thing and do another thing. This is the way to destroy lineage. Therefore, he said, don't talk about this to people who are not ready to put it into practice. Because it'll be those who use the teachings to obtain power, wealth, and fame. Instead of transforming themselves, it is those people who are capable of destroying the lineage. Therefore, for centuries, these teachings were given only to this very chosen disciples. Atisha had thousands of disciples, but he chose very few to whom he would transmit these teachings. And it was like that until Geshe Chekawa, let's say 3 generations. And what happens is that when Geshe Chekawa, after 22 years with his master, he saw that so he realized that if he were to die, these teachings would disappear. So he decided to make them public. So we find ourselves in the point in history of this lineage. I'm so happy that fortunately we have this living lineage. I've received these teachings by many masters, the Dalai Lama, Lama Michel Rinpoche, Trichan Rinpoche. From the abbot of Tashi Lumpo in Tibet, also by Geshe Wanchuk, from many masters, very important masters, who in their turn, had received this from their masters, fortunately, an uninterrupted lineage. Therefore, we have with us now this possibility. I don't believe that I've realized these teachings, this lifestyle, but I can assure you that this is one of the main guidelines in my life that I have. It's one of the most precious things I have, and I do my utmost to protect this. Therefore, I'm so happy to be able to share this with you. Remembering that which we will see in these days, and then this weekend and successive weekends, there are texts which really talk about the same thing, different approaches to say the same thing, which are the guidelines for our life, which will give us a direction how to live our life within us, from within to without, how to confront good and bad situations. For example, at the beginning of the 7 points of mind training, Afterwards, we'll look at verse by verse. The first part of the text, homage to great compassion. The essence of this nectar of secret instruction is transmitted from the master from Sumatra. Atisha he was born in Bangladesh. He goes right to Indonesia to receive these teachings. He was 12 years in Indonesia, and he was born in 982. And he went to visit his master, Serlingpa, and from whom he received these teachings. You should understand the significance of this instruction is like a diamond, the sun, and a medicinal tree. The time of the 5 degenerations will then be transformed into the path to the fully awakened state. These teachings, this lifestyle, let's remember the teaching. Let's remember the text is only a guideline. That which is like the sun, like a diamond. Our medicinal tree is actually to live according to these teachings, not the text itself, to apply this to our lifestyle. It's like the diamond because of all the precious stones, however, a jewel is beautiful in gold, a diamond is even more beautiful. A diamond surpasses the gold. It's almost if the charisma and the power of diamond is much better than gold. These teachings, if they're put into practice, even a little part, they will overcome completely selfishness and other bad habits we have. It's as if a ray of sun in a totally dark room. We just need a tiny ray of light to enter, to eliminate the darkness. Similarly, just enough to have just a part of these teachings put into practice correctly, to shed light on our ignorance. It's like a medicinal tree, just because just one fruit, one part of the root or the leaf to cure sickness. Similarly, just one part of these teachings put into practice sincerely to eliminate our selfishness. The point I want to make again is that in this period of the 5 degenerations, the time of the 5 degenerations will then be transformed. The more difficult our times are, the greater the generation taking place is, the better the conditions are for putting into practice these teachings. There are other parts of the teachings which require very particular circumstances. There are many trainings which require very silence, very few distractions, other favorable conditions which are very difficult to find. But with the mind training, there are no particular conditions, and the more difficult the external conditions are, the greater the conditions are to practice the mind training. That's why it's said that in this epoch of the 5 degenerations, the degeneration of time, which means that time has a lower value. A few days ago, it was the birthday of Deki. Deki is a Tibetan little girl, 8 years old, who lives here. I said, hello, Deki. Happy birthday, Deki. She loves talking Deki, and at a certain point, she talks about school, and at a certain point she says, because she said, time passes really quickly. A year goes by really quickly. It's so little, a year. Wow, this is an 8-year-old speaking. And her father was there, said, when I was little, a year seemed an infinity. Another year until my next birthday. No, but Deki said, no, a year is nothing. I was quite shocked by that. So time passes much more quickly. There are various explanations of this, that time gradually has less value. The sensation is that time passes more quickly. That's the first degeneration. All you have to do is to look at, even if life is longer today, but childhood is much shorter. There are many aspects in which one see that time diminishes. The second degeneration is of food, in which it's said that food gradually will nourish us less and less. Also the generation of sicknesses, new sicknesses that arise, and the generation of medicines, and the medicines which are able less and less to cure us, the degeneration of beings who have stronger and stronger mental defilements. They're always taken up. They're taken up increasingly with selfishness. It becomes more and more difficult to go against the tide. We live this degeneration. Is that right? What happens is that in these times of degeneration, through Lojong, they will be transformed, as it's said, towards the path of the fully awakened state. These teachings, if they're put into practice correctly, they have the power to use and to interact with situations of degeneration as a means to grow spiritually and to reach the state of Buddhahood ourselves. And this is such a wonderful thing for me. One of the characteristics of Lojong is that there are no excuses for not practicing it. Things are okay in your life, okay. Things are going bad in your life, even better to practice Lojong. If you're in good health, great to practice Lojong. If you're sick, even better to practice Lojong. And we'll see how one of the 5 points is to transform the 5 adverse conditions into the path. That what we're going to share are in these teachings, these guidelines that are given to us to manage to effectively adapt, transform every circumstance that we live into the path not to be Buddhist, the path of growth and the development of our qualities. And to me it seems marvelous. And honestly, that's one of the most precious things that I have received. Therefore, I'm very happy to be able to share this with you. But what happens is that depends on each of us, the way in which you embrace that which is given to you. It's like a recipient. If I'm going to pour water, the container, it can be open, it can be closed, it can be turned over, it can be dirty, it can have holes in it. I'll pour what I received. It depends on you, how you receive it. At the beginning of the teachings, instructions given on how to be a good recipient, a good container. First of all, we must make sure that our container is not turned upside down. When is our container turned upside down? When we're physically present, but mentally we're somewhere else. Can that happen? We're here, but we're thinking about this, that, and the other. So the container is upside down. We can never remember that which we haven't received. It just doesn't go in. The second thing is when our container is dirty. If the container is dirty with poison, it doesn't matter how pure the water is put in, it will still become poisonous. This is when we receive teachings with a state of arrogance, anger, an emotional state, and a negative emotional state, which we hear what is said, but we have a negative prejudice. So however pure it is, that which we receive, we dirty it. We have to look at our inner state, our motivation. And the third point, and the most difficult one, absolutely, is to be a container without holes. I don't think I've ever seen this at all in myself or other people. Once we see this, if we don't use this water, what happens is that it's lost. We forget about it. And after all, we go back home and we get caught up with everyday matters, and we leave the path in Lojong, we leave it in the book. The way not to lose that which we receive is to use it. For example, I receive water. How can I not lose the water? I go and water a plant. We have to use the teachings that we received to water and to nourish our own qualities as by applying them in our everyday life. And that way we'll never forget them. Is that clear? On the basis of this, the desire, the willpower to put them into practice, remembering that it's a very long path. It's not an immediate path. It's not an instant. In 3 months, you've achieved everything. It's longer. It's a life choice, a path for the whole of your life. You don't have to make the choice now. Well, look at these texts, these teachings, and at a certain point, you have to say, I want it. This lifestyle or not. Do I want to follow this direction or not? There are certain ways of teaching. Before the teachings, sometimes they ask for you to commitment to put them into practice, and I say, well, how can you do this if you haven't even heard what you're supposed to commit to? What I say is there are no pre-established commitments, but I ask you to, let's look at this text. What you see, and you see that it is a benefit, is to put it into practice. Otherwise we can just go down to the lake. We can go and have a nice walk. We can do lots of nice things. Now, to conclude this, is to give you the transmission of the first text. The transmission is because I received these teachings, as I said before, from my teacher. And the transmission the transmission is done by reciting what I heard before. Okay, I have this book, Method and Wisdom to Realize Inner Peace, where there are 8. We'll have a look at the first 3 practices. The last text is prohibited to people under 18 years old because it's very important, but requires a certain kind of maturity in practice. If one is to read this without a certain maturity. It can have the contrary effect. It's called the medicine which it's called the medicine to vomit the inner tumor, which is one's own selfishness. It's a kind of self-critical text, which doesn't need much explanation. I'll leave that. When one has a certain experience, one can read this. The first text, which is the first text which I received, the Jewel Garland of the Bodhisattva, which is written by Atisha. It was transmitted by Atisha, but transmitted by his main disciple. This is something very particular. Most of the disciples in the lineage had a monastic life. The principal disciple of Atisha, as you can see here in the temple with red hat, one of the greatest masters in Buddhism for many years, he said, where is the great lay person that I wish? And then eventually he found Trampompa. He was his main disciple. And this text is a transcription of 23 conversations that Atisha had with his disciple. And it's like heart-to-heart advice. When we read this, we should remember these are not philosophical texts to explain things, but rather to direct our life. Therefore, so they were transmitted heart to heart. Now I'm going to do the transmission. Above me, you can imagine that my masters, Lama Michel Rinpoche, and above them, Captain Trijang Rinpoche, until we get to Lama Tsongkhapa, Atisha, and from Atisha to Buddha Shakyamuni. And from them there's a flow of light from heart to heart that arrives to my heart, which is then emitted to your heart, which brings a transmission not only of the words, which we will read verse by verse, but principally the significance, the benediction, the blessing that they bring. First of all, I'll read in Tibetan. That's the language in which I received it. And then we'll read it in English or Italian. The jewel garland of the Bodhisattva. Homage to great compassion, homage to the masters, homage to the deities who inspire devotion. Put aside all doubt and hesitation and take delight in earnest practice. Abandon entirely lethargy, dullness and laziness, and exert yourself constantly with enthusiasm. With mindful recollection, vigilance and conscientiousness, guard the doors of your senses at all times, again and again, thrice by day and by night. Examine the continuum of your mind. Proclaim your own failings, but do not look for faults in others. Hide any good quality you may have while declaring others' virtues. Let go of concerns for gain and respect, and always renounce the desire for fame, and with few wants remain contented and repay any kindness you receive. Cultivate loving kindness and compassion, and make your bodhichitta stable. Avoid the 10 unwholesome actions, and let your faith be forever strong. Overcome all anger and conceit, and adopt an attitude of humility. Announce unethical forms of livelihood, and sustain yourself according to the Dharma. Forsake material possessions, and adorn yourself with the riches of the Aryas. Leave behind the busyness and distraction, and remain in places of solitude. Refrain from idle gossip, and always guard your speech. Whenever you see your masters or preceptors, cultivate the wish to serve them with respect. Both those perceiving eyes of Dharma and those first setting out upon the path are to be regarded as your teachers. And when encountering other beings, look upon them as your parents or your children. Do not befriend those who act in harmful ways and rely instead on truly spiritual friends. Abandon any feelings of hostility or ill will and always be joyful wherever you go. Avoid becoming attached to anything at all and remain free from craving and desire. Attachment prevents the attainment of happy states and furthermore destroys the liberation's vital force. Should you discover a means to happiness, strive constantly to put it into practice. Any task you have set out to do should be completed before embarking on another. With this approach, both will be achieved, but doing otherwise, nothing will be accomplished. Take no delight in harmful deeds. Should thoughts of superiority arise, there and then, subdue your pride and recall the instructions of your master. Should you ever feel daunted or dejected, uplift yourself with encouragement and praise. Meditate on the emptiness of both. When encountering objects of attachment or aversions, regard them as mere apparitions and illusory. Should you hear unpleasant words, consider them merely echoes. Should you suffer physical harm, consider it the fruit of your past. Keep entirely to solitude, far beyond the town, and like the carcass of a beast, hide yourself away. Remain free of all attachment. Be forever firm in your commitment. Should laziness and lethargy take hold, be sure to enumerate your faults and recall the essence of yogic discipline. Should you chance upon another, speak calmly and sincerely, taking care not to frown or grimace, and always maintaining a cheerful smile. Gradually, whenever you encounter others, do not be miserly, but delight in giving and forsake entirely feelings of envy. To protect the minds of others, be sure to avoid all quarrels and remain always patient and forbearing. Do not flatter others or be fickle and disloyal, but remain forever steadfast and reliable. Avoid disparaging people in any way and treat everyone with respect. When giving advice or instructions, do so with compassion and goodwill. Be sure never to denigrate the teachings. Set your sights on what inspires you the most. And through the 10 forms of Dharma practice, exert yourself in sessions by day and night. Whatever virtues you amass in the past, present and future, dedicate them all towards great unsurpassable awakening. Divide your merits among all sentient beings. Continually make prayers of aspiration, combining them with the 7 branches. Practicing in this way, you will complete the twofold accumulation of merit and wisdom and eliminate the 2 forms of obscuration by making meaningful this human existence. In time, you will gain unsurpassable awakening. The jewel of faith, the jewel of discipline, the jewel of giving, the jewel of learning, the jewel of dignity, the jewel of self-control, and the jewel of wisdom. These are the 7 riches, these most sacred forms of wealth. These most sacred forms of wealth are 7 riches that cannot be exhausted. Do not speak to this to non-human beings. In the company of others, guard your speech. Whenever you're alone, guard your mind. This text was taught and transmitted by the great master Atisha in the 11th century. So it arrives to us in an uninterrupted way. One of the most important things in this text, it's just enough. One verse is enough. These are the guidelines for our life. We'll have the opportunity to read this together, one verse at a time. Originally, I said this weekend, I said we would have looked at the 7 points of mental training, but given that it's not really a text, but it's a lifestyle choice, there's no rush. So I decided to start from the beginning, the teachings of Atisha, which brought our teachings to Tibet, and then from Tibet to us. There's no rush to understand everything. We must read this with attention. We don't have to read a lot, but we must, that which we read, and we must apply it to our life. Even if if we take a passage of this, even if we spend a whole week on one passage, that's a lot. So gradually applying all this to our daily life. One of the most marvelous aspects for me is that some things might be difficult, but there's nothing impossible. We're not talking about great mystical things. We're talking about observing your mind. We're talking about cultivating satisfaction. Aspects which make up our daily life, which we must be careful. And in this way, we can give a direction of transformation in our lives. After this afternoon, we will go into more detail and see in greater detail, one step by step. But I wanted this morning to start from where we are and what do we want. And let me repeat again, let's remember that we live the world through ourselves, and it's by transforming ourselves that we transform the world. That's the only way to transform the world, with our little steps, little daily steps. The training doesn't mean going to do a retreat in the mountain in a cave. That's fine, but real training is changing the way we interact in every situation in our daily life. And that which Atisha and his disciples transmitted from the teachings of Buddha, and which we have access to now, these are guidelines, very clear guidelines on how to interact in our daily life, to transform ourselves and to develop our qualities. This, to me, just seems fantastic to me. Because the first thing is, one asks is, I want to be this, but how do I do it? Here we have the explanation of how to do it. But as I said earlier, these teachings are valid when we put them into practice conceptually. There's nothing difficult. There are a few passages which with a few terms that we don't know. Who the areas, a few technical terms relating to emptiness, the emptiness of both, who are both. But we don't have to worry about that now. In general, it's very simple. The point is at the beginning to start with the desire. I advise everybody to get this book, Method and Wisdom to Realize Inner Peace. It's one of the most precious things that I have in absolute. If I should change this fun thing, I wouldn't give it away even from 10 million euros. I'm not talking about the physical book. If I can reprint it, sure I'd give it for 10 million euros. But I'm talking about the contents. I'm talking about the access to these teachings. This I wouldn't give away for anything in the world. And when we take this book, it's much more than just a simple booklet, because we have an unlimited lineage. Let's make the dedications. Let's stop, and then we'll restart. At dawn, at dusk, at night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and sprinkle the paths of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness. Repeat after me. Sen Chö Sutro. Chö Lam Tintro. May the mind become Dharma. May the Dharma become the path. And may the path be free from interferences. Have a good lunch.